I just spent 4 hours creating this masterpiece of an edit. Pretty impressive, right? Well, in this video, I'm gonna teach you how you can create it yourself. In this 40-minute masterclass, you'll learn how to cut, paste, and generate subtitles in Premiere Pro, how to animate not 1, not 2, but 3 high-quality animations in After Effects, like this futuristic animation here, this 3D button and book animation, and a rotating futuristic UI design. And you'll learn how to use my special sound design workflow to bring all these animations to life. And by the end of this masterclass, you'll be able to create something that looks like this, before hitting the $10,000 per month mark. Unlocking these clients will give you access. And if you want more in-depth courses like these, Ultimate Editors has more than 300 plus courses just like this one waiting for you. But now, without further ado, let's dive right in. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started on editing. And the first part of creating any edit is preparing our footage. Preparing our footage consists of 3 simple things: cuts, pacing, and generating subtitles. For that reason, we're over here inside of Premiere Pro, and the first thing we're going to do is drag in our footage. And as I mentioned, the first step is creating our cuts. So to do this, we're going to be selecting our razor tool and cutting right after our clip over here and right before we start speaking over here. We can now select it and delete it and bring our clip back. Let's go ahead and remove the silences for the entire video. And there we go guys, now that our raw cuts are complete, we have removed all the silences in the video. So now let's go ahead and go through and paste this using J-Cuts. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into one of my cuts here. I'm selecting my selector tool, holding down Alt and moving my video back a little bit. Then I'm going to overlap the cut just like so, and this creates a J-Cut. So let's go ahead and do this for the entire edit. And now that both raw cuts and J-Cuts are complete, there is one final step in preparing the footage, which is creating the subtitles. So for that reason, we're heading over to Window, down to Text, and clicking on Create Captions from Transcript. We're going to go under Captioning Preferences, set the maximum length to 25, which should be pretty good, and then set the minimum duration to 2 seconds, and set this to single. Now once this is done, you're going to have your subtitles, but the style is going to be horrible. So for that reason, we're going to select one of our subtitle boxes, head over to Window, and go down to Properties. Now let's go ahead and create a quick text style. First, we're setting the font of choice to Nexa, and I'm going to go ahead and set the zone to the center of the screen. Then I'm also removing the drop shadow from the background. I'm just going to drag my text down until it's somewhere in the lower third, like so. Now you'll notice that this text style doesn't apply to the rest of the text, which means we have to head over to our properties panel once again, click on the plus icon and click on create text style, and just click on OK, and this is going to apply it to the rest of the text in here. We could just go ahead and select all of our subtitles, head over to graphics and titles, and click on upgrade caption to graphic. Cuts are complete, pacing is complete, subtitles are finished with the text styles and everything. Now it's time to move into After Effects. So we're going to be selecting everything like so, right clicking and clicking on replace with After Effects composition. Now that we are inside of After Effects, there's a few things we should do before we start working on our edit. And the first thing you notice is our timeline looks hectic. So for that reason, let's go ahead and organize it. The first thing is align our video to our audio. We do this by dragging our video down next to our audio layers. The second thing we must do is turn all of these pre-compositions into regular layers. So we're going to select our base pre-composition, go to the top one, and we're going to be using a free plugin called Unprecompose to unprecompose all of these. So we head over to Layer and go down to Unprecompose and click on OK. Now the last thing we're going to do is we're just going to align all of this text to the clip below it. This is just for organization so that I can see what's happening. And now with this done, we can finally start working on our edit. The first thing I'm going to do is add a text style, which is very simple. I'm just going to select the deep glow effect and drag it onto one of our text, and I'm going to set the exposure to 0.2. Now I'm just going to copy this deep glow and just apply it to the rest of the text here. Now let's go ahead and also add in a quick animation to this text. So first, let's go to our first text and click on S to bring up the scale property. I'm going to keyframe my scale at 100 and just move this to the end. Then we're going to go ahead and start it at somewhere like 60, which is pretty good, and move this keyframe back to the beginning. So let's select both of these keyframes, head over to our speed graph, and make it start quick and then slow down. Now to make this even better, we're going to click on our layer and click on T for our opacity. Keyframe the opacity. Now we can move our opacity keyframe to the second scale keyframe and start it off at 0%. Let's go ahead and apply this to the rest of the text. We're going to select both these keyframes and copy them. Then we're going to select our text layer and place the playhead at the beginning of it, and then just Ctrl V to paste it. Now with this being said, our text is way too high up, so I'm going to be selecting all this, clicking on B to bring up the position, and just placing it somewhere down here. I'm just going to be adding a quick zoom in at the beginning just to get that viewer very engaged into the video. To do this, we're just going to be right clicking and adding in a adjustment layer. Then I'm going to be cutting it right after our intro. We're adding in the transform effect on on this adjustment layer. Let's keyframe the current scale, click on U to see that keyframe, and start the scale at 100 in the beginning. Then let's go ahead and change it up to somewhere around 120. Select both of these keyframes, head into the speed graph, and make them start quick and then slow down. And with this done, we basically end up with a smooth zoom in and a very basic intro. Now we can transition into our animations. The first step of making any animation is making the background. I'm going to right click and add in a new solid. To color it, I'm adding in a 4-color gradient effect. I'm changing the first main color to a white color and using the eyedropper tool to make the rest of them white. Then let's go ahead and go to our second color, make it slightly more gray. Let's go to our third color, make it slightly more gray. And let's go to our fourth color and make it somewhere in between. And then let's set the blend to 200. Now to stylize this background a bit more, I'm selecting the same solid layer and clicking Ctrl D to duplicate it. On the duplicate, I'm deleting the 4-color gradient and I'm also adding in the Venetian blinds effect. So I'm setting the transition completion to 85% and setting the width to something like 50. Then I'm going to be selecting this effect and duplicating it inside of my solid layer and simply changing the direction to 90 degrees. We're going to be adding in a turbulent displace effect and just changing the amount to 25 and increasing the size to something like 150. Now to make this effect a moving and live background, we're keyframing the evolution, clicking on U, bringing this keyframe all the way back, and then just moving it to something like 180 degrees. We're adding in the tint effect, and we're mapping the black colors to a very light gray. Alright, now the background's complete, let's go ahead and put our animation together. Start by adding in a text, then I'm going to write out 3 kinds of clients. I'm going to select all of it and set it to the light font, and I'm only going to select the word clients and set that to the bold font. Let's scale it down and place it in the upper third of our screen. We want to add in a gradient ramp effect on top of this text, and we're going to set the start of the ramp on top of the text and the end of the ramp right at the bottom. Then let's go ahead and make the start color a dark gray and the end color a really light gray. Now we could take this one step further by creating a very cool casted shadow on the text. To do this, we're duplicating our text layer and then we're adding in an effect called radial fast blur. Now all we gotta do is set the center to something like the top left of the text like this and increase the amount till we get something that we like. And then let's go ahead and place this under our main text layer. Now let's go ahead and get to work on the rest of the animation. I'm just going to duplicate the text that I literally just made and I'm just going to move it down to the bottom over here. And I'm going to type out the number 1. Now I'll make sure to use the bold font for this and let's go ahead and scale it up and let's place it over here on the left side. Now I'm placing the start of its ramp on top of it one more time and the end of it at the bottom. Let's go ahead and lighten up the start color and also lighten up the end color. Now let's duplicate this and write out the number 2 and place it down here, but just don't forget to place the start of the ramp on top of it and the end of the ramp under it, and duplicate it one more time, write out the number 3 and place it down here. Once again, add in the start and the end of your ramp. I'm selecting the drop shadow behind the 3 kinds of clients and parenting it to the main text layer. Now we're gonna click on P to bring up the position, keyframe the current position and place it somewhere around here, and then go back to the beginning and just have it start slightly lower. Now let's go ahead and spike this up in the speed graph. Then let's also combine a opacity fade in effect by keyframing the current opacity at 100, moving back and having it start at 0%. Our opacity only applies to one layer, even though it is parented. So we're selecting the layer under it, keyframing the opacity, moving it forward and also having it start at 0%. Now we're gonna go ahead and do something similar to the rest of these numbers over here. So I'm taking the number 1, keyframing the scale this time, moving the scale forward and having it start slightly smaller. Then I'm also making it start quick in the speed graph and also making sure to keyframe your current opacity at 100%, move it forward, have it start at 0% and move that keyframe to the back. Now let's go ahead and click on U, copy these scale keyframes, then we're going to select both our other numbers and paste it on top of them. I'm basically going to offset these numbers a little bit more. So we're going to right click and add in a new shape layer. Now for this shape layer, I'm selecting my rectangle tool and I'm basically holding down shift to draw a perfect square. I'm increasing its scale just a little bit. Then let's go down to the contents and let's go ahead and delete the stroke that's around the square. Then let's change the fill color to a light white color and let's change the opacity of the fill to something like 10%. Then we're going to go down to our rectangle path and increase the roundness until we have a relatively round rectangle. Right click and add in a new adjustment layer. Then we're going to add in the Gaussian blur on top of this adjustment layer and we're going to increase the blurriness to something like 40. And to finalize this effect, we're going to click on toggle switches and modes. Then we're going to track matte the adjustment layer over to the shape layer we just created, and this will only apply the blur to our shape layer which we just created. And now, so that we could see this, all we have to do is go down to our rectangle fill and increase that opacity to 100%. I'm gonna go ahead and select my Gaussian blur and set the blurriness to something like 70. Now the final part is adding in the user icon inside of it. So let's go ahead and import a user icon and scale this down. Now let's add in the tint effect on top of this user icon and set the map black to a bright white. Finally, to finish this off, we're gonna be right clicking, adding in an adjustment layer on top of our icon, and simply adding the deep glow effect to that adjustment layer and pre-composing it with the icon under it. Let's go ahead and bump up the radius to 750, tone down the exposure to 0.6, and set the chromatic aberration to enabled and set the amount to something like 0.5. So I'm selecting this first one, and since everything is controlled by the shape layer, I'm gonna go ahead and click on P and move its position over here to the top left on top of the number 1. And I'm also scaling it down to something like 100. Then let's go ahead and select these and duplicate them, bring them all the way to the top. Let's move them forward, and let's move our duplicate down on top of the number 2. Then let's select them all, duplicate them one more time, move them all the way to the top, and let's go ahead and move our duplicate number 3 on top of the number 3. So we're selecting our shape layer, we're clicking on P for position, we're keyframing the current position and moving it forward and just having it start off to the left of the screen. Now we're going to select both of these and have them start quick in the speed graph and then slow down. So for our second one, keyframing the current position, moving it forward and having it start off to the right side and then speeding it up in the speed graph. And for the third one, keyframing its current position, moving it off to the right and having it start off to the left of the screen, and also speeding it up in the speed graph. Now to add in another touch of detail, I'm placing the first shape layer on top of our number 1, the second shape layer on top of our number 2, and the third shape layer on top of our number 3. Now I'm also going to delay the start of all of these, and then right as our animation is about to finish before we transition into the next scene, I'm selecting all of these layers and clicking Ctrl-Shift-D to cut them off. Now I'm also moving slightly forward and also cutting off the text as well. Now to transition out of the scene, I'm basically just going to select all of our layers, click on T, and just keyframe all of their current opacity. Then I'm going to move forward and just set it to 0%. And now for the 3 kinds of clients, I'm going somewhere further down the line and then just clicking on T as well, keyframing the opacity, and then moving to the end and also dropping it down to 0%. So to start with the $10,000, let's right click and add in a new text layer, and then let's write out $10,000. Then we're simply going to rotate it by 90 degrees and simply going to scale it up, and obviously just make sure that it is at the center of the screen. Now let's also add the gradient ramp effect to it, set the start of the ramp in the top of the text and the end of the ramp at the bottom of the text, and simply make the start a dark gray color and the end a light gray. Now let's go ahead and quickly keyframe its current opacity, move back to the beginning and have it start at 0%, duplicate this layer and create a casted shadow by adding in our radial fast blur, setting the center to the top left and simply increasing the amount until we have a pretty cool casted drop shadow. We're going to go to our second opacity and change this opacity to something like 50%. Now to create our 3 squares, this is going to be the easiest part. So let's go ahead and add in a shape layer. Then on our shape layer, we're selecting the rectangle tool and we're just going to draw out a small rectangle that's smaller than our text. Then we're going to be deleting the stroke. Then we're going to go over here and click on the fill and change it to a radial gradient. Let's click on the colors. Let's set the start color to a black. Then we're going to set the end color to something like a light orange. Now let's click on a rectangle path, select our selector tool and move these 2 points until we have something like this. Then we're going to be going down to rectangle path and increasing the roundness until it's pretty round. Now we're going to go ahead and add in a few more effects to make this look really good. Now real quick, I'm changing the type to a linear gradient and simply setting these lines like so. And let's start by right clicking this, going to layer styles and adding in an inner glow. Let's increase its opacity to 100% and scale it up until we can see it. Then just increase the range until it's pretty smooth. Now we're going to set its color to a bright orange and tone down the opacity until it's barely noticeable. Now one more cool effect we could do is select this shape layer, duplicate it, and then on our duplicate we're going to change the fill type to a regular color and change the fill color to a black, and also make sure to delete the inner glow. Then on this specific layer we're going to add in the light sweep effect. We're going to set the center to the center of the rectangle and we're going to increase the width until we get a pretty cool edge. Now drop the sweep intensity to 0 and increase the edge thickness until you could see the edge pretty clearly. So I'm going to go with something like 10. Then all we have to do is click on toggle switches and modes, set the mode to add, and change the light color to a really bright orange. Alright, now that we can see this more clearly, I'm actually going to tone down the edge thickness to 6 and simply increase the width even more. Let's tone down the edge intensity to something like 40. Now finally, let's go ahead and create a casted shadow on this. So we're going to take the bottom shape layer and go ahead and duplicate it. Then to the bottom duplicate, we're adding in a radial fast blur and we're placing it somewhere like in the bottom left. and increasing the amount until we get a casted shadow. And for this bottom shape layer, I'm actually changing the fill type to a regular fill and changing the color to a black. Let's go ahead and tone down its opacity until it's barely noticeable. Now we're just going to go ahead and create 2 more squares out of this. To do this, I'm first going to parent the top shape layer to the bottom one and the bottom one to the bottom one. And now we're going to select all of these and go ahead and just duplicate them and place them up top. Now we can select our bottom shape layer and move it off to the left so that we can see this. And basically all we have to do is go into each one and then just draw a different shape. So for our first shape layer, we're going to go down here into our contents and delete this rectangle. And instead, we're going to replace it with a relatively smaller rectangle like this. We're also going to change its roundness to something like 50. Now let's go ahead and just copy this shape rectangle and then go into our second shape layer, delete the contents, and then inside our contents, paste the new rectangle. And then once again, in the top shape layer, delete the rectangle and the contents, and inside the contents, paste the new rectangle. Now we're going to select our base shape layer and go ahead and drag it up to the top. In the second shape layer, our rectangle does not come with a gradient fill, so we're changing the fill type to a linear gradient, but we're simply going to extend it a bit more to make it even smoother. And then finally, we're selecting all 3 of these shape layers again, duplicating them one more time and bringing them up to the top, then selecting the base shape layer and simply moving it to the bottom of the screen. Now for this one, we're going to be changing the light sweep direction to somewhere else. We're also going to be changing the center of the casted shadow to the bottom, and we're also going to be placing it under all of these layers. And now the final step is to animate everything coming in. We're going to select all of the ones which control everything. We're going to click on their position, and I'm going to keyframe their stable position somewhere around here. And then I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to have this top one over here start off on the left side. I'm going to have this middle one start off on the right side, and I'm going to have this last one start off on the left side as well. Then we're selecting all of these, heading into the speed graph and speeding them up in the beginning and slowing them down at the end. So we're basically just going to have this big block in the middle start first, and then these other 2 guys start later on over here. Clients you will need to unlock before hitting the $10,000 per month mark. Now one final thing I want to do is I also want to add a deep glow to the shape layer with the colors and simply tone down the exposure to 0.2. Let's copy this deep glow and add it to the other 2 shape layers with the linear gradients as well. And ladies and gentlemen, that does it for our first animation. Alright, listen, if you're still struggling to land high quality clients as a video editor, it's probably because your edits just aren't good enough. But what if I told you that in the next 90 days, I could turn you into a high-level editor, creating insane edits like these and actually get paid for it? Most editors waste months watching random YouTube tutorials only to end up making boring, basic edits that no one wants to pay for. And even if your edits are decent, you probably have no clue how to find or even close the high quality clients. That's exactly what we fix inside of Ultimate Editors. We take you by the hand step by step, and first we get you cracked at Premiere Pro and After Effects with our 2 biggest masterclasses. Then we teach you 7 viral editing styles that clients are actively paying for in 2025. So you'll learn how to edit like Josh Leon, Houston Cold, Iman Gaji, my editing style, and much more. And finally, we show you how to build a brand that makes clients come to you instead of you chasing them. This exact system is making our students $1,000, $2,000, and even $3,000 per month. And today, you can skip all the guesswork, get access to 300 plus courses, weekly coaching calls, and 24/7 community support, all in just one place. Ultimate Editors. This price is going to be going up soon, and once it does, it's not going to be coming back down. If you're serious about video editing, click the link down below, join Ultimate Editors, and let's make you a high quality video editor that makes $1,000 per month in just 90 days. I'll see you guys inside. Now it's finally time to move on to our second animation, where we're going to be diving into some cool buttons and very cool 3D movement. The first thing we need to do to get access to our second clip is we need to unhide all of our layers. Let's first select all of our text layers and animation layers we just made and just place them on top of the 2 clips that they belong to. Now let's go ahead and select all of these layers and hide them. Select our next segment, unhide that, and let's toggle our hide function. And as usual, the first part of making an animation is making the background. We're going to be adding in a solid layer, and we're going to be adding in the 4 color gradient to the solid layer. And then we're just going to set the main color to this dark black and use the eyedropper tool to get all of them to be black as well. Now we're just going to change our second point to a lighter gray, our third point to a slightly lighter gray, and our fourth point, keep it at a black and increase the blend to 250. So I'm selecting color number 2, and I'm just going to make it a really dark red. Then I'm also selecting color number 4, and I'm also going to add just a bit of this darkish kind of orange color. We're going from a white animation all the way to a black one in an instant. So the best thing we could do here is just have some kind of glitch transition. All I gotta do is add in an adjustment layer on top of these. Then I'm gonna cut it a few frames before our clip and a few frames after, and I'm going to add in an effect called invert. So I'm actually gonna go a few frames before our black background, keyframe the blend with original at 100%. Then we're going to move a few frames forward, set it to 0, maybe a few frames forward, set it to 100%, and then a few frames forward, set it back to 0, a few frames forward, set it back to 100%. Unlocking these clients, and with this set, that's literally all that our transition is. So first up, I'm selecting my rectangle mask and we're just going to draw out a rectangle something like this. Let's delete that stroke. Then let's go down to our rectangle path and just add some roundness to the edges. Now let's go ahead and add in a 4-color gradient. Place the points in all the corners of the button. Then let's just set one of them to this kind of darkish gray. And we're going to make all of them that same color. Then we're just going to take the second one, make it slightly darker, make the third one slightly darker, and the fourth one slightly darker, and bump up that blend to 150. Now there's a few things that we could do to this button to make it look way better. Let's start with the first one by selecting this button and duplicating that layer. Then let's delete the 4-color gradient and set the fill color to a pure black. Then we're going to add in the light sweep effect, place the light sweep in the center of the button and just increase the width a lot. Then just drop the sweep intensity, click on toggle switches and modes and set that blending mode to an add, and then just add the deep glow effect. Then tone down the exposure to 0.3. The second thing we could do is right click our main button layer and add a bevel and emboss. Now let's go ahead and move the angle so that the dark value is in the top left and the light value is in the bottom right. Then let's go ahead and bump the size up until we can see it. Drop the highlight opacity until it's barely visible and drop the shadow opacity until it's barely visible. I'm going to increase the softness until it is relatively softer. So we're going to right click and add in a new text layer. Now inside of this text layer, I'm typing out the word clients. I'm also going to double click and set it to a bold font. Then I'm going to scale it up so that it fits inside of our button and place it somewhere in the middle. I'm adding in a 4-color gradient. Now I'm going to place the points randomly along the text. Then I'm going to set the first color to something like a bright red. Then set the second color to something like a lighter red. Maybe set the third color to a lighter pink and the fourth color something to a bright orange. Now another thing we could do is actually add a light sweep effect on top of this text. Then we could set the center of the light sweep to the center of the text, drop the edge thickness to something like 3 and drop the edge intensity to something like 40. Increase the width so that this edge is along the entire text. And if we orient it so that the edge is on the left side or the bottom, it'll look even better. Tone down the edge intensity to something like 20. Last thing we're going to do is add the deep glow effect onto our text. And we're really going to drop the exposure of this thing to 0.4 and drop its radius so that it's only around our text. Now with this done, we can work on our next section. First, we drag in an image of a cursor. So we're adding in a tint effect and we're mapping the black to this light gray. Then we're going to add in a light sweep effect and we're setting the center to the middle and increasing the width. Then if we darken the map black to something like a darker gray, this should look better. Now let's go ahead and scale the cursor down to something like 20 and click on P and keyframe the current position. Let's drag the cursor so that it's somewhere off the screen. And let's move this keyframe all the way back. And we're going to move the cursor layer to somewhere around here. So then we're going to move our playhead forward and then we're going to move the position of the cursor so that it's up and facing the button. And then we're just going to go somewhere in the middle of those two keyframes and we're going to select our pen tool. And then we're just going to click and drag on this path so we create these two sliders. And we're just going to use our cursor to move this out something like this. Smoothen this out and let's just make sure that it starts quick and then slows down. Now there's one important thing to do and it's to make sure that the button actually interacts with the cursor. We're going to parent the clients layer to the shape layer. We're going to parent the shape layer to the one under it. Now we're going to go to where our cursor is just about to touch that shape layer, move a few frames before that and keyframe the scale. Then let's move forward and as soon as our cursor hits that shape layer, we're going to scale this thing up to something like 110. Let's just make sure to easy ease these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back to my text layer. I'm going to go down to my exposure and keyframe it. And then I'm going to move a few frames back to where the cursor isn't on the layer and drop it down to 0. Now, once our cursor lands on here, I want to create our click. So I'm going to go over to this keyframe, click on S, keyframe the current scale, move a few frames forward, and then drop the scale down to something like 12. Then we're going to move a few keyframes forward and bring it back up to 15. Now, as soon as this cursor clicks, I'm going to go ahead and select the shape layer which controls everything, and I'm going to keyframe the current scale. Then we're going to move forward, and as it clicks, I'm going to make the button small again, back down to 100. And as the click comes back up, we're going to scale this up until it is just as big as the screen. And now we're going to bring these into our speed graph. And I basically want the first click to be quick, but I want the buttons increase to start slow and then speed up. Once again, we're going to keyframe the exposure of the deep glow. And as the cursor clicks, we're going to increase the deep glow to something really bright. So afterwards, we're going to drop the exposure, but at the same time, we're also going to click on T to bring up the transparency, keyframe the opacity and click on U again. Then we're going to move forward and drop that opacity to 0%. Let's go ahead and bring this into the speed graph. These clients will give you access. We're basically just going to have the cursor go off the screen. So we're going to click on P to bring up the position, keyframe its current position somewhere around here, and then move forward over until the whole thing's big, and then just move it off the screen like so. Let's select our pen tool and also add in a cool slider in the middle and recreate the same S shape over here as well. And then we're going to bring this into the speed graph and just make sure it starts slow and then ends fast. And with this done, you should end up with this pretty cool background, which is actually going to fit perfectly into our next scene. So the first thing I have to do is head over to Sketchfab, and then I need to look for some kind of 3D book. I'm going to go ahead and download this as a 3D model. And now all I got to do is just import it over into After Effects. Let's make sure that it is the same composition size. Now I'm going to cut it up into the area that I want it to be in, and then I'm going to right click and pre-compose it. Let's go ahead and double click on this. Now let's quickly rotate it so that it is just flat. I'm going to right click and add in a new text layer and write out, here's where it gets good. Now I'm going to add a paragraph in between both of these. Then let's go ahead and bring both these texts closer together like this. Now another thing I'm going to do is select the rest of these and make them all thin fonts except the word good. And then I'm going to right click and pre-compose this. So on my text, I'm going to add in a gradient ramp, set the start right above our text and the end right below it. I'm going to set the start color to a bright white and set the end color to something like a gray. And then let's go ahead and add in a deep glow, but just make sure that it has a big radius like 750 and a very light exposure like 0.3. One final thing I'll do is I'll actually scale this up so that it's pretty big inside my pre-comp. And then back in our original pre-comp position, we can actually turn this into a 3D layer. And if I go ahead and select it and click on P and bring the Z axis up, I can see it's in front of my book. Now to make everything so much easier in a 3D composition, I'm going to bring up my composition like this, add a second view to the window, and just make sure my second view is custom view 1. Now the cool trick that we're going to be doing is we're basically going to parent this pre-composition to the main object over here. So I'm going to bring this pre-composition slightly closer to the book, and then I'm also going to place it down here at the bottom. So I'm going to go back inside of my pre-composition and do the same thing again. I'm going to add in another text and write out, this will teach you everything about clients. Then we're going to set the first line to a thin font, and we're simply going to right click and pre-compose this. Now inside my pre-composition, I'm also going to be adding in the gradient ramp effect, setting the start above our text and the end under our text. And we're basically going to set the start color to this bright white and the end color to a light gray, and also add in a deep glow. Just make sure to set the exposure to a 0.3. Now back outside, we're actually going to set this into a 3D layer as usual. Click on P and drag our Z axis out and just have it be somewhere on top of the book. Now I'm going to click on my rotation tool and just rotate around the book like this and just kind of move so that I can see its back. And then I'm just going to zoom out like so. Now I'm going to bring the second pre-comp somewhere to the back like this and just going to click on R for rotation, and I'll orient it 180 degrees around the Y axis. And I'm going to rotate back to the front one more time and just zoom out until I can see everything, and also scale this text up so that it's pretty big and just place it somewhere down here. So now everything is set up. All I'm going to do is I'm going to parent this pre-composition to the one under it and this pre-composition to the book. I'm going to rotate it something like this and then just kind of focus on the bottom text, keyframe its current orientation here, and then somewhere along this point I want it to rotate to the back. So I'm going to rotate the X somewhere like that, the Y all the way to the back, and the Z value just a little bit sideways. And the way I'm just going to start it off is I'm going to actually start it off pretty flat and rotate it slightly like so, and rotate it more on the Z axis. Now let's go ahead and take all of this stuff into our speed graph and play around with it. So I'm selecting all of it and clicking F9, and I want the rotation in the beginning to start relatively quickly, and then I want the rotation in the middle to spike up somewhere along in the middle. Now let's just go ahead and move this second keyframe all the way to the end and this second keyframe to the middle. So we're going to click on S and keyframe the current scale, and then we're going to click on U. Now we're going to move this scale to somewhere around here, which is where our book should end up, and we're just going to start it off at 0. Now we can select both of these, head into our speed graph, click on F9 and have it start quickly and then slow down. Since this movement is very rigid and it's very important that this ends up being smooth, I'm going to actually delete the second rotation keyframe. I'm going to right click and I'm going to add in a null layer. Then I'm placing the null layer under and parenting the book to the null layer. Finally, let's make sure the null layer is 3D. Add a keyframe before our second keyframe for the book. I'm going to move forward and just make sure that this thing also rotates and shows that second text that we're talking about. Now let's just make sure that this starts quick and then slows down. And let's go ahead and blend everything together with some better lighting. So I'm going to go back inside of my pre-composition. I'm going to right click and add a new light, and I'm going to make sure its intensity is 100. Put the spotlight above everything. Let's go ahead and place the spotlight so that it's facing in the top and pointing down on our book. Now we're going to go ahead and duplicate the same exact spotlight, click on P for position, and just bring it down and have it face the opposite direction. direction. If you feel like the intensity is low, we're going to double click on this and bump up the intensity to 200. And one final touch of detail we can add to make this look even more cinematic is we're actually going to add in another solid behind all of this stuff, and we're going to place it behind our 3D layer. We're going to add in a gradient ramp, and we're going to set the type to radial ramp. Then we're going to set the start behind the book, and we're just going to make the edges a black, and we're going to make the center something like a lightish gray. And we're going to bring the end a bit closer just so that the start is a harsher color, and we're going to make this a lighter white and increase the ramp scatter to make it blend in. And now all we have to do is click on T, keyframe the current opacity, and just have it fade in as the book comes in. And then all we have to do is set the blending mode to add, and we basically have a complete animation.
Unlocking these clients will give you access. And here's where it gets good. They will teach you everything there is.
And with this being said, that completes our second animation. Now animation 1 is done and we transition into animation number 2. It's finally time to transition into animation number 3. This very clean and high quality UI with very high quality profiles. Let's dive right in. The first thing we're going to do to dive into animation number 3 is go ahead and unhide all of our layers. Make sure we select one, Control A to select all of them, and then just simply hide all of the layers. Now I'm going to select all of my animation except my transition, and I'm simply just going to place them down right next to the clip which we were editing, which was this one right here. And with this being said, we can now dive into our new animation by selecting the new clip which we're going to be editing and unhiding all these layers, and then simply hiding everything else. So let's go ahead and right click and add in a solid, add in the 4 color gradient onto this layer. Then we're going to set the color to a black and use the eyedropper tool to make them all the same color. Then all we got to do is just make point number 2 a dark blue, point number 3 a more gray blue, and point number 4 can stay as a black. And then once we increase the blend to 200, we're going to have a pretty cool looking background. So I'm going to add in a new shape layer, select my rectangle mask, hold down shift and draw out a square. Then let's go ahead and delete the stroke around it, go down to our rectangle path and just give it some roundness. I'm adding in the 4 color gradient once again, and then I'm placing all the points on the corners of the shape. Then let's set one of the colors to a really dark black, then make all of them black, and we're going to make our second color a dark blue. We're going to make our third color a very grayish blue, and our fourth color a very lightish blue. Blend that at 200. So we're selecting our shape layer and duplicating it. This time we're deleting the 4 color gradient, and then let's add a light sweep effect on top of this. Then let's set the center of the light sweep to the center of the shape layer. We're going to put this in the top left corner and increase the width until it covers the corner, and then just drop the sweep intensity and simply change the light color to a really light blue. Then we're going to duplicate this light sweep and do the exact same thing on the other corner. Let's toggle switches and modes and set the blending mode of that layer to add. Last step is to add in a deep glow on top of both these layers. To make this effect a bit nicer, I'm going up to my edge intensity and I'm setting it to 80. Let's make sure to do this on both the effects. Let's drag in the icon of a user and resize it until it fits our frame. Then let's add a 4 color gradient on our user and place these points accordingly. Then we're going to start point 1 with a very light blue. Then we're going to make point 2 a slightly more bluish blue. Then point 3 is going to be a slightly darker blue, and point 4 is going to be a very dark blue. Once again, increase that blend to 150. Now to add some more texture to it, we're also adding in a light sweep effect. Let's go ahead and make sure that this is at the center of our icon. Increase the width and just drop the sweep intensity to 15. And also drop the edge intensity to 30. And there we go, this completes our user icon. So let's make sure to parent the user to the shape layer under it, and that shape layer to the one under it as well. Now I'm going to toggle switches and modes and just make sure that all 3 of these are 3D layers. Let's make sure we use a classic 3D view. Place this user icon on the left side of our screen and size it down a little bit. And let's go ahead and give it a little bit of a 3D rotation. Now let's get to work on our text. So first up, I'm adding in a text layer and I'm writing out the word dream. Double click on this and let's go ahead and make it a very thick font. Let's go ahead and size it up and place it on the right side over here. First, we're adding in a 4 color gradient to the text, and we're going to place the points somewhere along the text. Now we're going to make these points a light blue color, and then just make some of them slightly darker blue. Now let's go ahead and also add in the light sweep effect on this thing as well. Make sure it's at the center, set it to an angle, and increase the width. Then we're going to drop the edge intensity to 35 and increase the edge thickness to 6. Now if we add in the CC light rays effect on top of this text and move the center somewhere along the text, we should be able to see some light rays. So to get a very cool sweep on this, we're going to keyframe the center and place it over here on the left side. And we're going to have this keyframe in the beginning, Then we're going to move slightly forward and simply move this all the way to the right so that it passes through our text. And now if we go ahead and add a deep glow on top of this Dream Client text, tone it down to 0.2. Now we're going to duplicate this text, but delete the 4-color gradient and the light sweep and the light rays and the deep glow, and simply write out the word client, make sure it's a light font, and make sure it has a white color. And simply place this under the word dream and make it slightly smaller. Now let's go ahead and add in a quick and cool animation to the user icon over here. First, we're selecting our shape layer, clicking on P and keyframing its position and moving it forward. Then we're moving this thing off of the screen at the bottom over here. Now we're going to take both of these and speed them up in the speed graph. And then we're simply going to keyframe a cool rotation by clicking on R, keyframing the Y rotation, moving it forward, moving back, and then starting it off with a cool spin. Let's make sure this one starts fast and then slows down. And now we're selecting both of our text, clicking on P for the position, keyframing the current position, moving it forward, and then simply having them start slightly lower and moving that keyframe all the way back. Then we're going to take both of them into the speed graph and make sure they start quick and then slow down. And after that, we're going to click on T, keyframe the current opacity, move it forward, and then just have it start at 0% and move that first keyframe all the way back. Now, as soon as this phrase finishes, I want to transition into our second animation. So to do this, we're actually going to keyframe both of the opacity of these two texts over here, and then we're going to move slightly forward and drop it down to 0% and cut both of them. We're going to keyframe the current position right above our rotation. Then we're just going to move forward somewhere to around here, and we're going to rotate this so that it is once again spun but in the center, and then we're going to move it and place it in the middle of the screen like so. Now also don't forget to keyframe your X and Y rotation, move forward, and also make sure that both of those are straight. With this being said, now we could take all of these into our speed graph and make sure that they all have a spike in the middle. And then we're also going to take our position keyframes and make sure that they also have a spike at the same time. We're going to go back to the beginning of the movement, keyframe the current center of the light sweep, and then just move forward and make sure they end up at the same place that we want them, which is over here. Now, as this thing is coming into frame, I want a background to pop into there and also have some loading icons and so on. So let's go ahead and get to work on this. All we have to do is right click and add in a new shape layer. Then we just drag it and place it under our icon and draw out this rectangle. Now let's delete the stroke and add some roundness to the shape layer. And then we're basically going to copy the same 4-color gradient from the user icon onto this shape layer. Only difference is we're going to place the points on the edges. We're going to right click and add another shape layer. Then let's place it right above our UI. Select our pen tool and go ahead and draw a point on the left side, hold down shift and draw one on the other side. Then let's go ahead and cut this new shape layer right here and simply bring it down above our UI. Now let's go down to our stroke and simply change the stroke to something like 7. Set the color of this line to a really dark blue. And then we're going to basically duplicate it, go down to stroke and set the color to a really light blue. And then all we have to do is click on this add function and add in our trim paths effect. So we're going to drop the end until we have a random value. And to set it apart from the background, we're even going to add a deep glow to the colored line. Now all we have to do is select both of them and basically duplicate them and just make sure that we click on P and bring them down to the bottom over here. Only difference is we're going to take this line and we're going to change the trim paths effect on it to a higher value. Now let's go ahead and add in our text, which is the final touch. We're going to right click and go to new text. Then we're simply going to write out knowledge and we're going to place it down here, but just make sure you change the fill to a somewhat dark blue, and we're going to size it down to something like 80 and just place it over here on the left side. Let's actually make it even smaller. Let's go down to 60. Now we're going to take this same layer and we're going to duplicate it. Click on P for the position and let's bring it down to here. And let's write out the word experience. Now let's add a few more touches to this very cool UI. The last thing I want to do is I want to duplicate this UI background and delete the 4-color gradient and also add in the light sweep effect. I'd like to do the same effect like we have on our user icon. And so we're going to put this thing in the center. And then we're just going to have one in the top left with a big width and no intensity. And we're going to set its color to this really bright blue and then just duplicate it and have one in the bottom right. Now simply increase their width until they are very large and then set its blending mode to an add and add the deep glow to it. Now let's go ahead and parent the word experience to the word knowledge to the shape layer under it, and parent all of these until we get down to the bottom. And once we are at the last shape layer, let's go ahead and select it and click on P to bring up its position. Let's keyframe it right where the UI ends up, and let's go back while the animation is happening and simply have it start at the bottom of the screen like so. Now we're going to speed this up in the speed graph. And let's go ahead and start this slightly later so that the UI has enough time to do its spin. And now to transition into our last animation, we're just going to move slightly forward, and on that same old UI shape layer, we're going to just drop this all the way back down. Then we're going to go into our speed graph, make sure this thing starts slow and then ends fast. So let's go ahead and right click and add in a text. And over here, we're going to write out "You were one." Then we're going to double click and make sure we're using a heavy font. And let's go ahead and size this thing up, and let's make sure it is also full caps. Then let's shrink the distance in between the letters so that they are more cramped together. Now we're going to place this over here in the top, and then we're going to add in a gradient ramp to it. Set the start of the ramp on top of the text and the end of the ramp at the bottom. And we're going to set the start to a kind of a grayish white color, and then just set the end to the same color as the background. Now we're going to place this behind our user icon. We're going to actually make the start color slightly darker. Okay, let's go ahead and duplicate this and click on P and move it down to the bottom over here and write out "of them." And then we're simply going to move the start of the ramp to the bottom and the end of the ramp to the top. And to fade these in, I'm simply selecting both of them, clicking on T, keyframing the current opacity, moving it forward and having it start at 0%. And with this being said, guys, animation 1, animation 2, and animation 3 are all complete. It's finally time to bring this whole thing to life using sound design. And as you guys know, this is the most important step. This can either make or break this entire edit. So without further ado, let's dive right into Premiere Pro and sound design this entire video. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in my sound effects library. And if you guys don't have a sound effects library, you guys can learn how to make it in this video over here. Now, as we're watching through the edit, the first thing I notice is my first clip starts off with a zoom in. So for that reason, I'm going to import this quick whoosh over here. And I'm just going to align the peak of the whoosh with the peak of the movement, which is right at the beginning of the frame over here. And I'm going to cut the rest of it since there's obviously nothing there. Now let's go ahead and click on G and give it a -10 decibels. So I'm going to add a whoosh for the slide sound effect. The whoosh I'm going to be using is this one right over here, but it's way too harsh. So I'm actually using my rate stretch tool to go ahead and stretch it out somewhere like this. Now we're going to align the peak of this whoosh with the peak of the movement over here. Then let's go ahead and duplicate it and align it with the peak of the second movement over here. Then we're going to duplicate it again and align it with the movement of the third one. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add some spaces in between these whooshes over here so that we can add in our UI sound effects. And I'm going to be using this kind of computer glitch sound effect for the first one. Then I'm going to use this other computer glitch sound effect over here for our second one, right over here. And finally using this last one over here for the last one. We're going to get an analog button sound effect and we're going to drag this into our scene. And all we're going to do is we're going to apply a studio reverb to this sound effect and set the studio reverb to a vocal reverb large. I'm heading over inside of my risers and hits, and I'm dragging in this quick riser so that we could build up to that unlock sound effect to get this. So you will need to unlock. I'm going to use this UI sound effect over here for the big one, and then I'm going to use this other UI sound effect for the other two small ones. For hitting the $10,000 per month. Now we get to this glitch transition, and this is a very nice moment to use a very harsh glitch sound effect. Yeah, I've got this swoosh sound effect that has a synthetic feel to it. So I'm going to drag this in and overlay it right on the glitch sound effect. Now here, the first thing we've got is this cursor coming up. I'm going to use a water droplet whoosh. Let's go ahead and tone it down by -3. Then as soon as the cursor hovers over the button, I want a UI sound effect to show it interacting with the button. So I'm going to use this subtle UI sound effect over here. Now, once the click happens, I'm basically just going to reuse that unlock sound effect with a vocal reverb large.
Clients will give you access.
Now, once the button clicks and takes over the screen, I'm going to need a heavy whoosh to showcase that big movement.
Access.
So I'm going to import this deep voice whoosh over here, which sounds like a cyber whoosh. So I'm dragging in this kind of holy chords sound effect as soon as we make that click, and then cutting it right on the whoosh so that that whoosh blends it in. Now I'm gonna need a whoosh for this book kind of coming into frame, and then I also need another snappy whoosh for when it rotates. Now one more step I'm gonna take to make this sound even better is I'm going to add a UI sound effect for when the text appears on the screen. Then I'm gonna add in this sound effect over here right at the peak of the first whoosh.
And here's where it gets good. They will teach you everything there is.
Now to bring this into our second scene, I need a pretty heavy whoosh that kind of builds up from this scene and transitions over to this next one. Now let's start with a pretty simple whoosh over here. Then I'm going to simply duplicate it for this next section. Finally, for this UI coming up, I'm going to add a deep voice whoosh over here. And I'm also going to add one for when the icon exits the screen. Then I'm going to select both of these and make sure that they are at -15. Now as the words Dream Client come on the screen, I'm going to use a UI sound effect to introduce them. And for those light trays, I'm also going to be using that holy sound effect one more time, but this time without any barriers and letting the whole thing play out. But as it fades out, I'm going to set it to a -10 and just cut it short right here. And at this moment over here, when I say you were one of them, I'm going to head over and drag in a hit sound effect. This being said, I'm going to go ahead and end this entire short by dragging in another hit sound effect and simply reversing its speed. There are 3 main lessons I wish I knew before working with clients. Generally speaking, there are 3 kinds of clients you will need to unlock before hitting the $10,000 per month mark. Unlocking these clients will give you access. And here's where it gets good. They will teach you everything there is to handling clients. Thing is, your dream client is already out there. He has less knowledge and less experience than you, but you were one of them once. And for that reason, I invite you to focus more on building your brand instead of perfecting your craft. Now with this being said, it's time to finally add our music track. So let's go ahead and drag this thing in. Then I'm going to set its volume to -17. Now with all this being said, guys, that completes basic cuts, pacing, text, animation 1, animation 2, animation 3, sound design, and music. We've just gone through and edited this entire short completely from scratch. So let's go ahead and sit down and enjoy this short and its final result. There are 3 main lessons I wish I knew before working with clients. Generally speaking, there are 3 kinds of clients you will need to unlock before hitting the $10,000 per month mark. Unlocking these clients will give you access. And here's where it gets good. They will teach you everything there is to handling clients. Thing is, your dream client is already out there. He has less knowledge and less experience than you, but you were one of them once. And for that reason, I invite you to focus more on building your brand instead of perfecting your craft.